Good morning, good evening, and good day, viewers of our weekly Straight Talk program. This week, we have chosen a topic which we believe will reflect the ongoing elections campaign in our country. This is a matter of great interest to all Guyanese at home and abroad. The elections have been awaited for quite a long time, and it should have been held much more earlier than it is at this point in time. But as you know, as the old folks would say, the longest rope has an end. We haven't reached the end as yet, nor have we pulled the final curtain. We are nearing it and will be at that stage in a few weeks. Today we will speak on a topic which I would describe as forcing the outer limits. Outer limits has great implications for the elections in our country. And while these elections are fast approaching, the elections fever is heating up. We have to ensure that the temperature of this elections fever does not reach a stage where it becomes uncontrollable. Elections fever are quite normal in the course of an elections season or campaign. All the political parties are gearing up, trying their best to mobilize huge crowds. Some fail and some succeed. In this respect, the People's Progressive Party Civic has, according to observers, been attracting extremely large crowds at their public meetings, their rallies, and other engagements. In the city of Georgetown and other parts of the country, flags belonging to mainly the APNU-AFC and the PBPC adorn the GPL poles in many parts, in many villages, towns, and so forth. And of course, we have the usual situation, or I would say the unusual situation, where you have hooligans taking down and destroy paraphernalia belonging to the People's Progressive Party. At no point in time is there any evidence to show that activists belonging to the opposition have been doing likewise. And this is all part of the election season, but issues which are not, in this respect, acceptable. The overheating of the temperature is coming mainly from the APNU-AFC. And this is not a question or a matter of apportioning blame. The evidence is there for all to see, both in their actions and in their words. And this is why we have to be careful if we begin to test the outer limits of this elections season. We have heard, following the visit of a high-level delegation from the United States Congress, the President stating that elections will be free and fair. But while that is to be welcome, we have at the same time to be on the alert and be vigilant. Free and fair elections is not a gift, nor a concession, nor a privilege. It is a right. And therefore, for the President to make this statement as though he's giving or is offering something to the Guyanese people is not necessarily being very truthful. The fact of the matter is that elections and voting of the electorate is due every 5 years and is in fact a right that is enshrined in our Constitution. So free and fair election is a right that has been fought for by the Guyanese people over many years. The universal adult suffrage, the right to exercise the franchise, are freedoms which the people must enjoy as enshrined in the Constitution. But free and fair elections is just one part of the scenario. Most important of all, must be elections free from fear. There must be no fear whatsoever by the electorate, by each voter who wants to go to the polling station to exercise their vote. And fearmongers, people beginning to spread fear, have already started to do their activities which runs against the grain of a peaceful and orderly elections campaign. And this is where we come to the question of testing the outer limits. Who is engaged in this form of activity? Testing the outer limits, in effect, means attempting to change the rules under which elections ought to be conducted and under which each voter must exercise the franchise. Testing the outer limits, in effect, means seeking to control the electoral process. And I will come to elaborate a little more on these two fundamental issues that are inherent in this question of the outer limits. And finally, the outer limits, or encroaching on the outer limits, or pushing or pressing the outer limits, in the final analysis means an attempt to change the results or to tamper with the results of a free and fair elections. We have heard statements being made by certain individuals who appear to be setting the stage for subverting one of the fundamental pillars of freedom and democracy. And that is to say, when they make statements that create stirs, so to speak, or raise eyebrows in the Guyanese, among the Guyanese populace, and even within the media. This question of creating hysteria is not very good for an elections climate, because in creating hysteria in an elections climate, especially when you're telegraphing or sending coded messages to your supporters, it is not helpful at all if the elections are to be free and fair and free from fear. It is, in fact, going beyond the pale. Democracy and freedom are two important aspects of any society, and especially in a country like Guyana, where we've just started the process of building a democratic society, building a parliamentary democracy. These threats to freedom and democracy have serious and dangerous implications. So we have to be careful when we seek to create hysteria and when we seek to create mischief within the voting population. We have heard, for example, calls for supporters of the APNU to assemble outside polling stations. What does that mean? Assemble outside the polling station for what purpose? No amount of assembling outside of a polling station, save and except to witness the results of the votes cast at that polling station. But when you go to a public meeting and you call upon your supporters to be ready for the night shift, what does that mean? What night shift? Ready for what? And to whom? And for what purpose are you making that particular call? What, in essence, do you mean by this night shift? Night shift means getting ready to do work, to do a job. And that is how ordinary people would interpret that. And then we would hear statements also, and all these statements I'm referring to are coming from top leaders of the APNU AFC. We hear that there would be trouble if persons in possession of a pink slip are not allowed to cast votes at polling stations. This is another troubling matter. GECOM is currently from my understanding, trying to resolve this issue of persons who may have registered or re-registered during the last house-to-house registration exercise that was aborted. Some 91,000 persons are left not verified within the meaning of the revised voters list. And so when a political leader gets on the platform and makes a threat or begins to threaten GECOM by stating that if my supporters are not allowed to vote because they have a pink slip in their hands, then this is more or less what might be described as a recipe for riots. We are not hoping, at least speaking for myself, Guyanese are hoping that this will not come to pass. Nobody is praying for this to happen. Nobody is hoping for this to happen. But as we say, we have to always be on the alert. We have heard statements to the effect that supporters of the APNU-AFC must surround the polling stations, make sure that nothing goes wrong. What does that mean? These are activities that fall within the responsibility of law enforcement, particularly the Guyana Police Force. It is their role to ensure that peace and good order is maintained throughout and at every stage of the electoral process. GECOM has issued a statement recently clarifying the issues that have been raised in the public domain in respect to persons who may have changed addresses because they have removed their residence, and therefore the whole issue of transfers, the verification of those who may have transferred and moved from one address to another. And then GECOM has also made clear in their statements that the question of adjusting the National Register of Registrants is a matter that falls within the purview of the Chief Elections Officer. All of these matters need to be settled long before the elections. And when I say settled, I mean settled with the consensus of the participating political party. That is to say, of the 9 political parties that have registered or that GECOM has accepted as legitimate contestants in the forthcoming elections. And so the settling of these issues by consensual means is extremely important for us to proceed to an election that is free and fair, an election that is free from fear. What has to happen is that if a person is concerned about the address not being corrected, then that person must go back and check the voters list, what is called a revised voters list. And if they still have matters that is of concern to them, then naturally they need to go to the nearest GECOM office with a view to being guided on how to proceed from there. And so there's no need for anyone or any political party to create mischief and confusion in our country. It is rather disingenuous when, having referred to the statements I referred to earlier by top leaders of the ruling coalition, that they are now seeking to change the rules of the game and to assign, so to speak, these questions to the opposition People's Progressive Party, Civic. They are now accusing the People's Progressive Party, Civic, for attempting to create confusion and mayhem in the country before the elections are held. When in fact, it is they who are creating the confusion and the mayhem by virtue of the statements which I just referred to in this program. So among the population, there's a tremendous amount of suspicion, rightfully or wrongfully so, about what is likely to happen on elections day. It is important for those suspicions not to go away or to be brushed under the carpet, but for those suspicions to be taken into account by GECOM particularly, because it is GECOM's responsibility to ensure that the conduct and the direction under which elections are held are transparent, are agreed by all the political parties, and that the conduct of these elections take place in an atmosphere of peace and tranquility. Now, there are four component parts to the holding of free and fair elections. And these four component parts, they're all interlinked with each other. In other words, you cannot cherry pick. It's not like a bowl of spaghetti. You can pick and choose what you want to do or not to do. These four elements are all interlinked and intertwined with each other. They need to be taken holistically as a total package for the holding of free and fair elections. What are these four components? The first component is GECOM, the institution that is saddled with the responsibility to ensure that the elections are free and fair, and the elections are held in an atmosphere of good order and tranquility, and according to the rules, the Representation of the People's Act, and the constitutional rights of each and every Guyanese. That's the first component, being GECOM. The second component is the electorate itself, meaning persons who are on the official list of electors, which they call the OLE, the official list of electors. These persons on the OLE are the persons whose names and physical appearance have been verified with the internal procedures and processes that obtain within GECOM. So the electorate also has a role to play in ensuring that these elections are free and fair and free from fear. Their role is to be vigilant, be informed, and be on the ball, so to speak, because it is they, in the final analysis, that will determine which political party or groups of political parties that will administer the affairs of this country in the next 5 years. Those 5 years being very critical and being very extremely important for the Guyanese people. The third component has to do with the political parties themselves. The political parties play an extremely important role in any elections in any part of the world. It is the parties that contest. It is the electorate, both and the supporters that support the political parties. And the political parties' role is to ensure that their supporters are well informed, that their supporters are mobilized, and that supporters are ready to participate in elections. That is why at almost every rally and every public meeting, you would hear the leaders call out to their supporters present, "Are you ready?" And the response would most likely be, "Yes, we are ready." Being ready means that you are acquainted with what you have to do during the campaign, you're acquainted with what you have to do on elections day, and you're acquainted with what you have to do after the elections results are announced. Each one of those issues has an important role for the GECOM, for the electorate, and for the political parties. The final and extremely important component in ensuring free and fair elections and ensuring that the elections are free from fear is the international community. So far, we have heard very positive statements from the international community, and we welcome them. But it's not only statements that they've made. They've also made financial contributions in different forms. Some in the form of public awareness programs, raising the education of voters in terms of voters' education. Some have provided technical assistance by virtue of experts and technical persons with technical specialities coming to Guyana to assist GECOM and to guide GECOM without interfering, so to speak, in the GECOM process internally. And we are also grateful not only for the statement, the positive statements that were made and the contributions which they are making to the holding of free and fair elections in this country, but we're also grateful for them to provide observers to observe the electoral process. Some countries have already has some of them already have observers, advanced party observers in Guyana, and some have already announced that larger contingents will be arriving in Guyana in the month of February. So the international community has an extremely role to play, because it is once they pronounce on the results of the elections, that is the final call, so to speak, on whether the elections were free and fair and free from fear. These are the four important components, as I see it, of the holding or for the holding of a free and fair elections in Guyana. My friends, my comrades, and my listeners, I would encourage you to pay close attention, or to continue paying close attention to the electoral process in Guyana. You have an important role to play. Your conscience must be your guide when you go to the polling station to vote. And therefore, as we approach March the 2nd for the holding of these elections, I wish to call upon you, I wish to appeal to you to ignore calls that test the outer limits, calls that provoke mischief, calls that provoke violence or could create violence. And therefore, it is our responsibility as voters in this country to ensure that these elections are not pushed to the outer limits, and that peace, goodwill, and cooperation prevail in our country as we move inexorably towards March the 2nd. I thank you, and until our next program, I wish you well.